All right. Well, not every St. Patrick's Day falls on Wednesday, and the Lord just laid on my heart to do something for St. Patrick's Day. It's not a long lesson, so you still got time to eat your leftover corned beef and cabbage. But just a quickie, okay? Because interesting topic, okay? So St. Patrick, and I subtitled it, "The Gospel is Worth the Sacrifice." So with that being said, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions just to get you thinking a little bit. First question is, what comes to mind when you think of St. Patrick's Day? Yeah, I heard the bagpipes and the green and the beer. Yeah. Paul. Shamrocks. Yes. Yes. Now, do y'all see the leprechaun in the picture? See, because they're very hard to see, and they're much harder to catch. But there actually is a little leprechaun hiding in there. So, anyway, take my word for it. If you had once been kidnapped, abused, and held as a prisoner, would you return to your captors to share the love of Jesus with them? Yeah, we might like to think we would, but, you never know what you would do until you're in that situation. Yeah. And what's the big deal about green anyway? Ireland is the Emerald Isle. Well, there's more to it than that. But it's a good answer. Right. That's a good point. But if you're in financially good shape, you're in the black. And if you're not, you're in the red. That's right. If you don't have green, you end up in the red, right? Yeah. All right. If you were trying to find the pot of gold, which end of the rainbow should you go to? Yeah, I was really thinking about that. Like, hey, by the time you get to the one end, it wouldn't be there. By the time you get to the other end, the rainbow would be gone, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So it's a good thing. Now, if you could catch that rascally leprechaun, what would you do with him? Yeah. Would you beat it out of him? Oh, okay. Well, when I think of St. Patrick's Day, now this is me now. This is just my opinion, but I like to get up early. I like to get up early in the morning anyway. I'm an early person. I get up early, and the first thing I like to do is take a nice hot shower with some Irish Spring. That puts me right in the mood right away. And then, of course, with my coffee, I've got to have some Lucky Charms. Yeah. Because they're magically delicious. And then, that just kind of gets me through the day for what I call the late lunch, early dinner meal. And, of course, you got to have corned beef. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? How many of you had corned beef today? Okay, just a couple of you. Well, we got some cooking, but we haven't eaten it yet. So it's still cooking. So anyway, And you got to have the cabbage. Got to have the cabbage. And I was thinking about some taters. But I want the real potatoes, not the instant, but I want the real ones. Lots of cream and butter whipped in there. So, but there's one thing that I have to complete that meal. What do you think it is? I heard Irish whiskey. Guinness, yeah, stout. Anyway, no, I was thinking about going to McDonald's and getting me a Shamrock Shake. I mean, that looks pretty good. And you can still put a little grasshopper. Okay, all right. Okay. So that's actually about the limit of my knowledge of St. Patrick's Day. Okay. So let's try to separate the man from the myth. So, we talked a little bit about the rainbow, and of course, somewhere there's a pot of gold that we want, and but you usually got to catch that little leprechaun, don't you? You know, I think a lot of what we hear about St. Patrick really predates St. Patrick. It really goes to a lot of the pagan druid, mythology, and a lot of times that's what happens when Christianity goes into a nation. Some of that paganism kind of bleeds into it and amalgamizes with it, and so it kind of gets mixed up in the story. But let's talk about the early life. That's how he looked, actually, yeah. Well, after the St. Patrick's Day parade is over, and by the way, I read somewhere that is at one time was the biggest parade in the world. Boy, that was even funny. I didn't even know it. Okay. But yeah, I don't know if it's the Chicago one or the New York one, where they said it's the biggest parade in the world, which kind of surprised me. And after, everyone's giving you a little pinch for not wearing green, St. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland. But again, there's a lot of misconceptions about him. For example, he isn't technically a capital S saint. We're all saints, aren't we? If you're a Christian, you're a saint. But we're technically, I guess you call us little s saints, but he's not one of the big S saints. He wasn't Irish. He could have been a lot of things, but he wasn't Irish. And he did not drive all the snakes out of Ireland. So, in fact, there are books that are just literally filled with the legends of St. Patrick. And there's no way of really knowing what has some truthful basis to it or not. But most of it is probably kind of exaggerated or fabricated, I would imagine. St. Patrick may have been born with the name Maewyn Succat. So Patrick was not his real name. So Maewyn Succat. Now we don't know that for sure, but that's a possibility. Okay. It is unclear if he was born in England, Wales, or Scotland, but the consensus is that he may have been born just northwest of Glasgow, Scotland, around AD 390. So we don't really know his real name. We don't really know when he was born. I mean, he was a real historical person, though. We just don't know. I mean, in comparison, tradition holds that St. Nicholas was born in the year 270 and died in the year 343. So St. Nicholas predates St. Patrick just a little bit. Okay? And, I think they're a good comparison, too, because, some people have vilified St. Nicholas, and other people particularly worship St. Nicholas. And it's the same thing with St. Patrick. A lot of people have vilified him because, he's this Catholic guy, this, and people say negative things about him. And then again, like I said, so many legends about the guy, like he was a god, so. Patrick's father or grandfather was a town councilor and or a Christian deacon, maybe both. However, the British Isles at that time were occupied by Rome. And being that he had a high position either in the church or as a government official, there's a possibility that Patrick came from a Roman aristocrat family and originally of Celtic descent. So he could have been a Roman. How many of you knew that? My brother-in-law, he knows everything over there. Now, one interesting thing, it means absolutely nothing at all, but notice he's wearing red. I'm not going to tell you what it means. No, I just want you to notice it. I just want you to notice it. No big deal, okay? Okay. When Patrick turned 16 years old, he was captured by pirates in a raid and forced into slavery. He was taken by ship to what was a very pagan Ireland and sold to a chieftain named Milchu. Patrick had little interest in Christianity until he became a slave. So maybe the slavery really ended up being a good thing, right? He worked hard for his master as a shepherd. Satan meant it for evil, but God meant it for good because his experience caused Patrick to embrace the religion of his fathers, and he became a man of prayer. So it really made it, you never know what God is going to do in your life to change you. God is always moving you. You all realize that, right? He's moving you from, point A to point B. And sometimes he's got to move you in a hard way. But he's always moving you. And, of course, we're moving spiritually. That's the hope, to learn and grow and become more like Jesus, right? So that certainly was a big effect on him. Oh, by the way, what's he wearing here? Green, wearing green. Means nothing. It means, I'm just saying it. What's he wearing there? Half green, half blue. Yeah, almost, yeah. Now, one night, Patrick dreamt that he had escaped, so after 6 years of bondage and servitude, he did escape and returned home. I wouldn't have waited for the dream. I would have tried to do it a little bit earlier, but Patrick later went to England. Again, we think that's where he received his religious instruction before returning to Ireland to serve as a missionary. St. Patrick wasn't the first evangelist in Ireland because Pope Celestine reportedly sent a bishop named Palladius in the year 431, which was about 5 years before Patrick. And Palladius ministered to the Christians that were already in Ireland, but he was not very successful making converts. And let me just say this, naturally there were probably some Christians at that time that arrived in Ireland or, that became Christian. But you've got to realize that would have been a very, very small minority of people. Very small. Hey, what's he wearing there? So when Patrick was in his mid-40s, he returned to Ireland to replace Palladius. Since Patrick had previously lived in Ireland, he understood the Irish clan system. So I was kind of thinking, well, if he was from Scotland, obviously the Scottish clan system is different from the Irish clan system, and I couldn't tell you what the difference is. I haven't gotten that far yet, but kind of interesting, kind of an interesting thing. Patrick's strategy was to focus his evangelistic efforts toward the chieftains first, who would then in turn influence their clans. And really that is one of the missionary strategies that we still use today. All over the world, go to different places in Africa, anywhere, South America, you name it, and usually they try to get the leader first. Or if it's a family, like a big family, they try to get the father first. If you get the father, realize salvation is a God thing. So you don't know if the people are genuinely converting or not, but as a rule of thumb, if you get the dad, you'll probably get the family. But if you get the mother, and you don't get the dad, you usually don't get the family. Okay? So. In fact, Patrick's former master Milchew became one of his first converts. I mean, he knew where to go, didn't he? He went right to that guy's house. Can you imagine the shock? Yeah. For both of them, really. The Shamrock. St. Patrick made many missionary journeys to preach the gospel throughout Ireland. However, one of the biggest stumbling blocks was in explaining to the people the concept of the Trinity. And this was especially true because many of the Irish pagan deities came in sets of 3. Isn't that weird? No, they came in sets of 3. And really, that's understandable when we look at Revelation 16:13. John wrote, "Then I saw 3 evil spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are spirits of demons performing miraculous signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for battle on the great day of God Almighty." So we know the battle is the Battle of Armageddon, right? The great day of battle. It's actually the battle for Jerusalem, but it will be in the valley of Megiddo. But isn't it interesting that demonic entity came in 3, right? And so, So I really have no doubt that the pagan entities that primarily they were Druids back then were definitely channeling real demonic entities. So according to the legend, Patrick used a shamrock, which comes from the Irish word seamgrog, and literally translates to young sprig. So a shamrock is not necessarily a 3-leaf clover. We know it's a young sprig, and it probably had 3 leaves. So it probably was a clover, right? Probably. But as we understand it, St. Patrick used a 3-leaf sprig to explain that there is only one true, almighty, living God, yet he manifests himself into 3 distinct persons. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, right? And I think the people could look at that symbology and understand it, Patrick devoted his life to serve God through the Irish people for 30 years, and he died on March 17th. And so when we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, we're actually celebrating the date of his death. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Yeah. While he wasn't solely responsible for Ireland's overall conversion, by God's grace, he was successful, and the rest is history. So he's a very interesting person. Now, again, there's so many legends, so many miraculous things that he had supposedly done. For example, I read that he supposedly raised the dead 33 times. Now, is that 33 people or one guy 33 times? I would have told him after the 5th time, let me go. Now I'm going to tell you a real quick story. This is nothing. I didn't read this in a book. This is actually one of the St. Patrick stories I heard in Bible college, and I just think about it still this very day. So, one day St. Patrick was baptizing his first convert. So I'm thinking, hey, maybe this was Milchew, right? His former master, right? And they were both waist deep in the water while hundreds of people stood along the shore. Patrick began preaching to the crowd, and as he did, he would raise his staff up in the air and slam it down really hard. And after about 20 minutes, the water began to turn red with blood. And Patrick asked the new convert, "What is that?" And he answered, "That's the blood coming out of my foot that you keep hitting with your staff." And Patrick said, I'm sorry, why didn't you say anything? And the new convert said, I don't know, I've never been baptized before. I just think of that all the time. I don't know. I mean, I could just picture it, Anyway. Okay. I'm starting to run out of slides here. I mean, this is really short. Eradicating the snakes. Legend has it that Patrick stood on an Irish hillside and delivered a sermon that drove the snakes into the sea. While it is true that the Emerald Isle is snake-free, it stands to reason that because, first of all, Ireland is surrounded by the ocean, that's number one. Number two, because of the receding blanket of ice from the Ice Age, which is kind of important. And the fact that it's still cold there to this day, I mean, it gets pretty cold. It's very unlikely that Ireland ever had snakes to begin with. Scholars believe that the snake story is an allegory for Patrick's eradication of pagan ideology. And that to me makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Yeah, because those pagans were evil. Man, they did some bad stuff. Child sacrifice, and they did some really bad stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. And the color green. The Irish countryside may be many shades of green, but knights in the Order of St. Patrick wore a color known as St. Patrick's blue. And so really the color was originally blue. So how did green become so emblematic of St. Patrick? The association probably dates back to 1798 when the supporters for Irish independence used green to represent their cause. So green began a political statement against British rule, and it became a religious statement because some Catholics started wearing green and the Protestants started wearing orange. And so it's a political / religious statement, whatever. But St. Patrick would have been originally blue. Yes. Really? Did you know why? Well, we know why now because that's funny. Yeah. Okay, and legend has it that leprechauns pinch people, but if you wear green, it'll make you invisible to them. Aha. You can try. I think really kind of there's symbolic of demonic beings, but that's just me. I don't know. Okay, so Patrick wasn't Catholic. Patrick was not Roman Catholic in the way we think of Roman today. Around this time period, the church was changing. Now, if you remember, it wasn't just that many hundred years before Paul was in Rome. No, not my brother-in-law. I mean, the Apostle Paul was in Rome. And, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, Paul was in Rome, and he writes the letter to the Romans. He writes the letter to the Roman church. And, they were a very good, solid, legitimate church. I mean, there was not, they weren't any different from the Corinthians, the Thessalonians, the Philippians. It was a good church. And but around this time, and I think it's probably because of Constantine. Y'all know the story about Constantine? Yeah, some of you do, some of you don't. Constantine supposedly got saved. And to this day, we don't know, was he really saved or did he not? Was he not saved? But he did one of the worst things possible that you could imagine. And you know what that was? He legalized Christianity. Now, that was one of the worst things he could do. You know why? Because he not only legalized it, he made it illegal not to be one. So everybody was labeled a Christian. And if you weren't labeled a Christian and you didn't go to church, well, now you're a heretic, right? So, from that point on, you had a lot more false Christians in the church. And that's been a battle that the church has struggled with the whole time. Back in the old days, if you were not a Christian, you wouldn't go to church, And, if you got captured, people would put a gun to your head, or a sword, and say, hey, renounce your Christianity. And if you renounced it, maybe they'd let you live. And if you didn't renounce it, maybe they'd, kill you. But back then, you pretty much knew who was a Christian and who wasn't a Christian. But he made it illegal to not be a Christian. And so it caused a plethora of problems that we're still struggling with today. But again, the church in this case was changing. Okay? It was changing a lot. And as I understand it, Patrick did not agree with the changes. And consequently, the Roman Catholic Church never officially canonized him. Okay, so he was bucking the system. They didn't like it. And so he didn't get sainthood. Until the 1700s, St. Patrick's Day was observed only in Ireland. And for them, it was a relatively somber occasion with silent prayer at home or at church. So it was almost like communion, where usually when you have communion, it's a little bit more of a solemn service. It's not like a bunch of praise music going on usually. It's a little bit more somber, and that's the way they celebrated. The observance dramatically changed when Irish immigrants living in the United States began organizing parades and other events on March 17th as a show of Irish pride. For many people around the world, St. Patrick's Day has evolved into a secular party with iconic foods and music. So it used to not be like this at all. And again, I think this is now the second year in a row now that St. Patrick's Day is going to be, for the most part, virtual, right? You can watch it on TV, but at one time, it was the biggest parade in the world. Corned beef. We're reaching the end now of my sermon because it's running out. Yeah. Anyway, corned beef. So while Irish people do eat corned beef, they also eat pizza and French fries, and they eat everything else, right? But normally the people of Ireland eat a type of pork or ham on holidays, kind of like what we would do, okay? Supposedly in the late 1800s, Irish immigrants in New York City's Lower East Side substituted corned beef. They purchased it from Jewish neighbors because it was cheaper and the idea caught on. So we've been celebrating the Jewish St. Patrick's Day. And we didn't even know it, did we? Yeah. Final word. Okay, we're at the end now. Just to put St. Patrick into perspective, Patrick lived and ministered 1,000 years before Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I mean, God, can you think about how long ago that was? So, I mean, it stands to reason that there's going to be a lot of myth mixed in with the facts. I think they were making a movie about St. Patrick, and I don't know if they were going to try to give the real St. Patrick in the movie or if they were going to embellish it with a lot of the so-called miracles, but I heard that they either made one or are in their process of making one right now. But 1,000 years before Columbus, so I mean, we're talking about a really long. Again, it's hard to strip away the myth from the myth, yet there are still a few more interesting points that I want to drive home with you. First of all, the church's corruption grew and caused Patrick a lot of grief. Okay? He was a really, really good guy, as I understand it, very biblical type of a man. And you know who was also a good guy was St. Nicholas. If you know the story of St. Nicholas, a lot of the girls were very poor, and he took his own money and would throw it in through the windows or under the door or down the chimney or whatever So the girls had dowry money so they wouldn't have to go into prostitution. So really a very, very wonderful man that I don't think he would want his name and all this stuff to surpass the most important thing of all, which is the birth of Christ, that we celebrate, I'm not against the Santa Claus thing. It just kind of runs together, and people are more interested in the Santa than in the birth of Christ. And the same thing with St. Patrick. Ireland's pagan druids were extremely barbaric, and Patrick's pursuit of converting the Irish was relentless. So, these are the people that enslaved him, and yet he didn't give up. Therefore, Patrick's conversion of a nation and his relentless moral stand by God's grace made St. Patrick a signature person in Christian history. And so he's got now the red outfit back on again. But, all the different artists portray him a little bit differently. But really, he was known for blue, the color blue. So next year, wear your blue. Eat ham. Trying to think if there's anything else I can add to that, but yeah. So there goes my mentality of St. Patrick's Day right down the tubes. Yes.